Hello everyone, welcome to this final session of the SRA 2024 Virtual Compliance Conference. I'm really pleased to be running this session today. We had great interest in this session when we ran it face-to-face a few weeks ago, and pleased to run it today with you today, a virtual audience. The way that this session is going to work today is we're going to play a recorded segment of the presentation that we did on the day. That will last around about 25 minutes long, so please take the opportunity to listen to that. After that is played, we will then reconvene with our expert panel from that day. They'll all be here to answer any questions that you have. To submit a question, you should see a link underneath the video. Please submit questions as the video is playing, and we will look at those throughout the next 25 minutes, and we will ask those to our panelists at the end of the video. Please make sure that the questions are quite general rather than specific situations that you have been in, to make sure that we can answer those for you. And please ask questions as soon as they come to you. The more questions we get from you and the more interaction, the better the session will be for everyone. Now I'm going to hand across to the video and Daisy McAndrew, who was the broadcaster and journalist who hosted the session on the day. Thank you very much.
Let me introduce you to our panel. We have Chris Rogers, Director of Research and Analysis from the Home Team at the SRA, Natasha Crombie, Detective Sergeant at the City of London Police. Now, Natasha's work, as you'd imagine, involves this area specifically in supervision of a crypto investigations team and supporting businesses and regulatory bodies as well to enhance their fraud awareness, prevention and reporting. Rowan Troy, Senior Cybersecurity Consultant at Littlefish. Rowan's got extensive information security experience, helping implement strategies that can align with business units and their process. We've got Jim Hawkins with us this afternoon, Delivery and Security Director at C3IA Solutions Limited. Now, Jim plays a really crucial role leading accounts across both public and private sectors, but specialising specifically in this area, cybersecurity and information assurance. So that's the top team. We're incredibly grateful to have them here guiding us in this session. Before the five of us get stuck into the questions and how they can help you, Natasha's really kindly prepared some thoughts to get us kicked off, really explaining what she does and how she can help them, the trends she's seeing from that incredible position that she's in. So, ladies and gentlemen, give Natasha and the rest of the panel, please, a show of your appreciation with a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming in such wonderful numbers. I'm Detective Sergeant Natasha Crombie, and I'm from the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, and I'm going to be updating you on data and trends around fraud and cybercrime. Now, each year, the NFIB carry out an annual assessment, and from that, we can identify the strategic priorities for the year. And just so you are aware, the priorities that were identified for this year are investment fraud, courier fraud, mandate or payment diversion fraud, social media hacking, fraud by abuse of position of trust, check card online banking fraud, romance fraud, and ransomware attacks. So I want to just go on to the trends, and I'm going to invite you to take screenshots, by the way. I've only got a few slides, but you're welcome to take screenshots. I know these are quite busy, so you may want to have a look at these in more detail later. But these are the trends for cyber-dependent crime. So these are things like distributed denial of service attacks, ransomware attacks, and hacking. And I'm going to let you digest this, but essentially, in summary, we had over 30,000 reports, equating to £8.3 million worth of losses. Now, small to medium enterprises with 1 to 9 employees were most prolifically targeted for social media hacking and ransomware attacks, for example. and obviously ransomware being quite a high threat in terms of impact versus cost. Now, obviously, this is from those who have reported to us. I am alive to the fact that large, huge industry organisations may not report to Action Fraud or to the NFIB, so they won't be represented in these figures, but it's still quite telling. Now, on to the fraud trends. Now, these include cyber-enabled crime. So this is any fraud perpetrated with the use of a device or a computer. And comparing to the cyber-dependent crime reports, we had over 330,000 reports as opposed to the 30,000 reports, and that is equated to £1.9 billion worth of losses. Now, those aged 30 to 39 are at greatest risk of being victims of fraud. Males are more likely than females to be victims of investment fraud, and females are more likely to be victims of ticketing fraud. The most targeted organisations are actually limited companies, with mandate fraud or payment diversion fraud being the most reported by those organisations. And in fact, losses as a result of payment diversion fraud have increased year on year by 32%. Now, 67% of fraud that's reported is cyber-enabled, and the top fraud types are financial investment fraud, card, bank account and online check fraud, and consumer non-investment fraud. And what I've done today also is I've got some figures for you specific to the legal sector. So 50% of cybercrime reports related to business email compromise, which in effect is the payment diversion fraud within your sector. 22% related to ransomware attacks within your sector. 18% related to hacking within the legal sector. And the remainder comprised of phone hacking, data breaches, and malware. Finally, organisations with 10 to 49 employees made up just over a third of reports within the legal services sector. Now, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau at City of London Police, who are the national lead force for fraud, host the Enhanced Cybercrime Reporting Service. This service is for businesses, charities and organisations currently suffering a live cyber attack. So please do call this number immediately, and this service is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if you find yourselves in that unfortunate situation. It is exclusive for businesses, charities and organisations in terms of the 24/7 service, and it could be necessary if insurance companies become involved, and also if there is third-party involvement, for example, from the Financial Compensation Recovery Scheme. You will receive specialist help. You'll get signposting for technical help to deal with the ransomware or distributed denial of service attack. For example, you might be signposted to a cyber resilience centre or to the NCSC, the National Cyber Security Centre. I want to just help you manage your threat, harm and risk in general though. One of the things you can do is enrol in the NCSC's Cyber Essentials Certification government-backed scheme. There is a cost. However, once you are accredited, it comes with free cyber liability insurance with a £25,000 limit of indemnity. It's for organisations domiciled in the UK or Crown dependencies who have an annual turnover of less than £20 million. The whole organisation must be certified, and once you have completed, you have to opt in to get the free cyber liability insurance, otherwise you won't be covered. Also, at the very least, please do sign up for police cyber alarm if you haven't done so already. I had the pleasure of speaking here last year and talked about police cyber alarm, and we had a significant uptake of it, which was fantastic. So those of you who are not aware, it is free, it's Home Office funded, and it's software on your systems that alerts you to a potential cyber threat. The alert comes to you so that you're aware, and it also comes to us at the police so we can reach out with advice, which will usually be carried out by your local police force area. It also provides the opportunity, of course, to report the crime. Now, that is it for me. My goodness, I could talk for a long time, but I'm going to go and sit back down now, and I'm going to hand over. Thank you very much for your time.
Natasha, thank you very much. Well, first of all, fantastic to know that there was an uptick last year when you were talking about police cyber alarms and the other tips you were giving there. But obviously, what you're saying, the picture you're painting is a pretty grim one. It's an alarming one. You talked about the amount of reports that there are to law enforcement. But Chris, that made me think about how many reports are you getting as the regulator? Do people make the connection that if this happens to them, they should contact you?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And actually, there are three sets of circumstances in which we want the regulated community to report incidents to us. The first of those will be whether where you've been subject to a cyber attack and that's had an impact on the firm or its clients. So we need to know, and we need to know quickly in those cases. Secondly, where there's been an attack, where there's been likely to have been an impact on clients. So that it could be unverified or verified at this stage. But if we think that there's a chance that may have happened, that needs to be reported to us as well. And then thirdly, we're really interested to know sort of near misses, if you like. What we're not talking about here is all of those ropey emails that we all get frequently saying, please click on this link. So we're really interested in sort of near miss events. And the reason for that is that we want to build together a picture of how the risk profile is changing. So we do get reports from firms. You know, I suspect that there are some that do go unreported at the moment, but I would encourage people, it is a requirement to do so, so you need to let us know for one of those three categories. And the other aspect of this is, we're talking of course about the SRA here, there are requirements to report things to other regulators as well. So I know the ICO have requirements for reporting for incidents as well, so best not to forget those. And then separately, of course, and this is something which may be overlooked but may not be overlooked, is to notify your insurers if relevant in good time. Okay,
that's good tips. So there are obviously, if these things happen or nearly happen, there are people you should be talking to about it and reporting. But Rowan, thinking about navigating a real cyber attack, can you walk us through some of the mistakes that people make?
I mean, yeah, there's plenty of mistakes that people have made in the past, and I've seen them in the flesh. But I think there's two real core concepts you need to get your head around. And the first one is the question of what do I know, what don't I know? And when you come together during a live cyber incident, it's really important that you write down the things you know, what's actually happening, and the things you don't know, the things that you think, actually, do I need to find this out? I've been in a number of tabletop exercises over the years, and I've watched people scramble about trying to do all sorts of different things. Technical people do technical things, business people do business things. They don't really meet in the middle, and the problem is they go into their safety zone. They go to where they are most comfortable. What they need to do is come together and say, okay, what do we know from a technical perspective about this? What do we know from a business perspective? And write it down. It's really simple, just write it down. And then the things you don't know. Do you know, as Chris pointed out, that data has actually been exfiltrated? Do you know that your customers are affected by this? Those are the sort of questions you have to start with first before you then go forward to try and understand how you're going to isolate that problem, how you're going to eradicate it, and how you're going to recover from it. And the second really important piece is planning. Planning is so important that you need to have something that you're going to put together that the business is aware of, and those stakeholders that are involved in that plan know and understand their position in that plan. And that plan also should include your supply chain. Absolutely must include the supply chain today, because it's one of the most common vectors that people are unfortunately attacked through is through a supplier, not necessarily direct, but actually through a supplier. So making sure that plan includes the supply chain.
And just picking up on that, you were saying, very important to write down and be aware of what you know and what you don't know. But is there also a sort of bunny in the headlights response?
There absolutely is. A lot of people do get in a panic state because it's something it is a fear place. It's a place of fear, and a lot of people unfortunately sell on that fear, which I don't particularly enjoy. But yeah, there is a bunny in headlights moment. It's important though to remember that as the attack is sort of progressing, that you have the right people around the table that can make decisions. You need the decision makers. If you leave it to the IT department, it's not going to be something that they're going to be able to really be comfortable with dealing with. Security isn't an IT problem, it's a business problem. And again, it's another focus that seems to have shifted because we are so technical today. We kind of forget that the business needs to be on side as well. So having those right people in the right room should hopefully eliminate the bunny in the headlights.
And Jim, obviously a lot of people thinking, okay, I've got to get my planning right, I've got to get my cyber security right in my overall business plans. But presumably there are an awful lot of people saying, I can help you with that, I can sell you something, whatever it might be. And how can people navigate how best to what a good plan looks like, I guess?
Yeah, thanks, Daisy. I think first of all, actually, I'd like to take us back to the opening address this morning with Paul. He made a really interesting comment around the SRA potentially using data to produce better data intelligence. Now that infers on all of us that are involved, of course, that we have resilient and robust networks to manage that data. So what I want to do is take you through some of the steps that we would take a small business through to help them develop a robust and resilient plan. Firstly, think of some threat scenarios. Now these can be really complex, and certainly for big organisations working globally they are. But for small businesses, we tend to look at just three threat areas or three scenarios. Firstly, you can't get access to your building. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter, but you can't get access. Flooding, roadworks, whatever it might be. Secondly, you can get access to your building, but utility services are not available. So no heating, no electric, no power, no air conditioning for your staff. And thirdly, you can get access to your building, but you can't get access to your IT and your data and your information, which is the bloodline of the company. And from a cybersecurity point of view, that's generally the area we like to focus on. But I would encourage you to think holistically about all of those scenarios. And then when you've thought about those scenarios, think about how much time your company can live before reputationally or financially it goes under against those three scenarios. So if you don't have access to your IT or your data, your client data, financial information to pay your own staff or pay your suppliers, let's pluck a figure, say 5 days. It might be 5 weeks, but let's say it's 5 days. So all your planning subsequently should be based around 5 days to recover those services, to get access to the building, to get access to utilities, data, and so on. So taking those 5 days, we then ask ourselves, what are our critical assets in the business? Critical assets can be anything that's important to you and your company. Okay, it can be the shiny box in the corner that's holding the single spreadsheet of all the client information. But equally, it could be people, because Susan, fictitious Susan, might be the person in the company who's the only person who knows how to use your application that the company relies on. Okay, and you can guarantee that if there's one of those scenarios on the day, Susan won't be available. So succession planning to make sure someone else can replace Susan is very important. So that's your critical assets. We then look at roles and responsibilities for the plan. So who's going to enact the plan, who's going to execute it, who's going to manage it, who's going to run it? What are the stakeholders that we need to engage with? And as Rowan said, that might include third-party suppliers as well. So work out who the roles and responsibilities are, and again, keep in mind succession planning of your people. We then start putting the plan together. We look at service level agreements and third-party suppliers within our overall plan. And then we turn to a comms plan, and we want to get that comms plan right before the scenario or the incident happens. Because in the heat of the moment, you don't want to be pushing out updates on LinkedIn, social media, on your comms channels that are reflective of the pain and the anguish that you as a company or individual are perhaps going through. So sit down, work out who, how often that you need to report to. And again, as we've heard, that might be external as well as internal people. You've got to tell your team what's going on because they're a vested part of the company. But externally, the SRA, the NCSC, the ICO, action fraud, and so on. So those external stakeholders that we need to report to as well. And then once we've developed that plan, we want to test it. We want to robustly and regularly test it to make sure it's fit for purpose. we always talk about tabletop exercises where we'll sit down with all those stakeholders and we will run through the plan in a slow, methodical way to make sure everyone knows their part in the plan, what he or she is going to do in the event of one of those scenarios happening. And then lastly, we review and maintain the plan. Your company doesn't stand still, okay? Ebbs and flows, people come, people go, you take on new services, new clients. And as the company changes, your business continuity or resiliency plan should also change to reflect that.
A lot to think about there. We're going to chat for another few minutes, 10 minutes or so, but do start thinking about your questions if they're occurring to you now. I want another technical question, and start with you, Rowan. What's the best thing, or the most crucial thing that small firms should do to stay safe? The top tip.
There's plenty of things I could suggest in this sphere, and it does feel like sometimes we're a bit of a broken record on this front, but from a technical perspective, I think if I were to look at all the incidents that I've been part of over the last 10 years, most of the time it's a compromise of an account. It's someone's account has been compromised in one way or another, whether that's a third party account, whether it's someone in your business's account. The account compromise is still one of the biggest vectors, as Natasha mentioned. So the way to protect the account is really to ensure that your users understand what you want them to have as a password. The NCSE guidance has now changed on this year, so there is no more requirements to keep resetting passwords because that makes it very difficult for users to remember. The key thing they're stressing, though, as we all keep stressing, is making sure there is another factor of authentication with the account. It's not just a password. Even if it is SMS text messaging, which is a slightly dated way, it's better than nothing. Clearly the applications like the Microsoft Authenticator, the Google Authenticator, all of the Authenticator apps that are out there today provide that level of there is no, if someone does happen to lose their username or their password's too simple to breach, if they haven't got that person's phone or device, therefore the account is still safe. You can still monitor those logins coming at you, but you know someone's not going to get in. So I think if it was going to be a top tip, it's going to be around accounts. Account safety, account security is going to be the number one thing I can suggest, because I see too many times where a password has been brute forced because it's easy to guess, Liverpool 123, something like that, and there's no other factor of authentication behind it to prevent someone from getting inside. And it happens more frequently than I would care to consider. But with MFA, with another factor of authentication, it just prevents that really easy route into your business.
Jim, same question. If there was one tip, or maybe Rowan has taken the words out of your mouth.
Yes, well, to a degree, and Rowan quite rightly is focused on the technical aspects, and they're vitally important. And I'll focus on people, because the best security is people, process, and technology working seamlessly together. So. From a people perspective, they are your first line of defence. Okay, if we think of your business as a castle, and your firewalls and your MFA is the castle wall, your people are the individuals who are going to open up access through that. Okay, they're going to let them in accidentally, normally through mistakes, and therefore I like to focus on the people bit. And so first and foremost, security culture in the company. Try to develop a security culture. The NCSE has some great resources. Posters and learning and development opportunities, and you can place these around your company so that people walking around it just becomes back through osmosis. They start soaking up that security culture. Training and education, again, resources from the NCSE. They don't cost any money. You can download them and use them. Auditing and assessments in your own company to make sure those processes are working as they should be. And then finally, have an open and honest reporting culture. Okay, there should be no blame when it comes to cybersecurity. If professionals who work in the cybersecurity world are caught out, and we are occasionally, then what hope have people who are not cyber practitioners got? So don't blame them. Okay, in many ways, reward them for reporting incidents near breaches and so on.
Chris, I saw you nodding there, and I wonder whether is there a reticence? Just coming back to the original question I asked, is there a reticence for people to tell the regulator what's happened in case it comes back to bite them, in case the regulator comes down on them like a ton of bricks?
Yeah, and I sense that's quite a real viewpoint that some people will have. And for those who have engaged with us in this case, where they are telling us about near misses, because we all can learn a hell of a lot from them, they will have noticed that the way we approach them and the language we use when we write back to people has sort of evolved and changed a fair bit over the last couple of years, or certainly over the last year or so. So actually, previously, I think people, rightly or wrongly, would have had a view that actually the regulator is then in danger of taking action against them, which, if it's an appropriate thing to do, we may decide to do it. But actually, the key driver here is that we can all learn from this. And we will share things. We will share things through our risk outlook publications, for example. If we spot a new trend that people are telling us about, and even if just shining a light on it can help stakeholders and help the regulator community, that's something we'll do. But you will have noticed that the language has evolved a little bit from the SRA side in terms of a response from us when people are reporting.
Interesting. And Natasha, going back to where this is all coming from, rather than the weaknesses that we all have in business or personal life, where is this threat and these attacks coming from? Is there anything that we know, geographically, demographically, is there any shift or change in who these invisible cyber attackers are?
I think we know that there are certain areas of the world that might be more prone to this kind of attack than others. But other than that, I think the best thing to do is be really wary. And I think I'd like to just echo what Jim was saying about people focused. We know that we've seen a significant amount of reports that have come into action fraud where the person, that first line of defence that you said, has been the fail, unfortunately, because of social engineering. And actually, regardless of where these attacks are coming in from or where the weaknesses potentially are threatened, the people are very important, and under no circumstances should anyone ever give any digits or any of those elements of the multi-factor authentication that Roman was talking about to anyone, ever. Even if they say they've sent it to you themselves, which also happens. So I just wanted to reiterate that. It's really important. But it is a global issue, and I'm sure we're all aware of certain areas more than others.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that recorded session. You'll see that I've been joined by the expert panel from the day. Before I go and ask some questions to them, can I just put a reminder out that the availability is still there for you to continue to ask questions throughout the next 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to start with a question that we've received. I'm going to put this to Natasha, and it's probably something that everyone kind of wants to know about. The question is, if I was to receive a ransomware demand, should I pay?
Hi, hello everyone. In short, the answer is no. Paying ransoms doesn't reduce the risk to individuals or organisations. And in fact, my understanding is that the ICO won't treat it as a reasonable step to protect data if you do pay. The difficulty is that by paying, you're giving criminals the resources and incentive to launch further attacks, and it doesn't guarantee an outcome. In fact, once you pay, you then get entered onto a list which can be sold on the dark web as somebody who pays, and you will potentially encourage further targeting. So the advice from the NCSC and other organisations like that is, and us at City of London Police and law enforcement generally, is not to pay.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Natasha. And Chris, coming to you now, more of a focus on kind of the SRA. Will the SRA take action against an individual or firm if they have been victim of a cyber attack?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So the answer to this question, there isn't a straight answer. And it depends frankly on the circumstances. And actually what we're interested in is that firms take reasonable steps up front to prevent these things from happening. And even having taken reasonable steps, it may be the case that an attack is successful. And I would say that in those cases, the likelihood of the SRA taking action would be grossly diminished compared to other circumstances. So really, it depends. I can't give you a hard and fast answer, but I would focus on this point that we're looking for firms and individuals to put in place reasonable steps to protect client information, money, and themselves.
Right, thank you very much, Chris. Okay, Jim, a question for you now. What do you think is the most significant challenge facing firms in terms of preventing or mitigating attacks?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So for me, it's understanding the totality of the threat. Years ago, tools that adversaries would have at state level are now more often in the hands of lower level attackers that they can buy off the dark web. So that creates an awful lot of noise and threat against businesses. And for some businesses, it's just knowing where to start amongst all that noise that's out there. And in some cases, that becomes lethargy or deafness. So they don't do anything because they just don't know where to start. So for me, it's that lack of activity, lack of engagement, lack of planning for firms to deal with the totality of threats.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jim. And Rowan, a question for you. What should a firm or an individual do if they believe a supplier that they use has suffered a cyber attack?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. I think the first thing to do is to make sure you're doing your own investigations. Don't believe the rumour mill and what potential websites might be saying about things. Do contact them directly. Have an open and honest conversation and understand what's happened. And most importantly, what's in your contract with that supplier will hopefully have elements of what to do in terms of a cyber breach, and how you will report that to your own board, but also how you'll get that information from that supplier. So I think it's really important that you do that first, rather than try and read what the press might say, because ultimately some things can be misunderstood, can be construed. And the key thing is you need to find out what potentially has happened to your data, and potentially your customer data, if it's a supplier with customer data involvement, before you decide to then take an action. And as Jim rightly pointed out, proper planning on that front will help you be decisive, help you be efficient, and not struggle to understand, what do we do, how do we do it, etc. So it's kind of that's probably the key points you really want to think about if you believe a supplier may have had a breach.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And a question, I'm happy for whoever to jump in on this one, but a question that we've just received. So cyber isn't just an IT issue, it's a people issue as well. What's your advice for firms who just see cyber as a firewall issue?
Thanks, Sam. I'll jump in first on this one. I'm sure others will have views on it too, but the cyber is everyone's responsibility. Just seeing it as a piece of equipment or a firewall that sits around the outside of your equipment is not the right way to look at it. And this goes back to the point I was making earlier about taking reasonable steps. Are you creating a culture where it's possible, where colleagues are happy to speak up if they think that something's going wrong, or if they spot something which looks sort of a bit weird or a bit wrong? The culture of speaking up would say that it's a comfortable environment for them to do that, as opposed to something that, in the worst case scenario, people would look to bury, because let's face it, no one likes bad news. So I think it's everyone's responsibility, and if you start to see it as just an IT issue, then that's a very bad outcome.
Thank you. Any other views on that question before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I would add very much along the same lines, but also in addition to people, it's understanding the organizational structures that you might have in place in your business. So whilst it's everyone's responsibility, there are varying levels of responsibility, of course, at board and management level, all the way down to team and individuals. So making sure they're all aware of their responsibilities and their roles when you've had a cyber attack, having those plans in place that's already been alluded to, and particularly for management and the board, making sure that they're engaged and they understand their role and how they can drive and develop that security culture and education across the entire business, because that's really where it starts.
Thank you very much, Jim. Okay, coming on to the next question then. Rowan, this question for yourself. Is there an issue with clients, suppliers, and firms all using different approaches and rules regarding cyber prevention?
I don't think there's an issue per se in terms of everyone using different strategies, methodologies, etc. I think you'll find a lot of the key standards that we work to in the UK, so things like Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, all of those big standards that are around there, including NIST and the NCSE Cyber Assessment Framework. There's actually quite a lot of overlap with them. They are talking about the same things in some in greater detail than others. And some actually have more of a focus on recovery, say, rather than traditional control sets. But I think the general gist is you need to pick a standard that's going to work for your organisation. And if you're unsure on which to use, then talk to a consultancy because they will have experience with deploying these standards, deploying these frameworks to organisations of your size and in your industry. So it's best to kind of engage with someone who knows these things inside and out so that you can then make the right decision on which framework to use. But I don't think there's a problem. I think more generally, it's about people being able to implement controls to prevent cyber issues. And I think in general, there's really good industry practice now. It's just getting people to apply it. That's the key bit.
Great, thank you very much, Rowan. Chris, coming to you for this next question as it relates specifically to the SRA. Should we report potential threats or breaches, or only if we know that they have happened?
Yeah, great question. So our reporting requirements are sort of fairly clear on this one. In the situation that's asked here, yes, we would expect to report if it's had the potential to have an impact on clients or information or money, even if there's an unverified risk that information has been lost, for example. So yes, we expect that a report would be made to us in good time in that scenario. But we're also really interested to hear for near misses where nothing actually happened, but that's helpful for us to try and build up a picture of what's happening in the ecosystem, and then if necessary we can issue sort of warning to other firms in terms of what's happening and things that they should look out for. But certainly yes, if there's the potential to have an impact on for example client money or information, then yes, there's a requirement to report to us.
Right, thank you very much, Chris. If I could just put a reminder out, if anyone's got any questions, please do ask them. I'll just move on to ask another question that we've had come in. Rowan, I'll come to you again for this question. So do you have any views on cyber insurance and how to know what is needed with cyber insurance?
Yeah, I mean, cyber insurance for a while did become very difficult to obtain. I think in the early days when it was introduced, lots of claims were being paid out and insurance firms were obviously losing out on those claims. I think then a lot of insurers stopped selling cyber insurance because they couldn't maintain it. It wasn't sustainable for them. I think they got together a few years ago now and they built a 12 controls of cyber insurance program amongst themselves, which actually covers quite a lot of the good foundational industry things that we should be doing to protect our organizations. So the 12 cyber controls assessment that we do covers all of those things. And I think if you're unable to achieve those 12 cyber controls, then they won't put you forward for insurance. So to know what type of insurance you need, it's always good to start with understanding those controls and where do you sit as an organization today in relation to meeting those requirements. Because if you meet those requirements, then they'll put you forward. And cyber insurance is very important. I think there's definitely a reason to have it in order to protect yourselves, to give you that safety net that in the event a control fails, you still are able to survive essentially a cyber attack. And I think Natasha said in her presentation, if you pass the Cyber Essentials Plus program, there is a cyber insurance offer there as well for those who pass that. So it's probably good to have a look around, talk to some brokers about what options there are. But most importantly, you need to make sure that you meet their requirements well and you're effective with those requirements, because ultimately if there's anything that is outstanding or there's anything missing from that and you try to make a claim, they're unlikely to pay out.
Right, thank you. Anything else from the panel on cyber insurance?
just really briefly, Sam, we had someone in the room at the main event actually who was saying that because they had the Cyber Essentials accreditation, they were able to get reduced premiums on their cyber insurance. So, or they were able to get it too. So, just to call out that as one example, it's not verified from our side, but it is an example that was given in the room.
Great, thanks for that example, Chris. Natasha, I'm going to come back to you. So we saw the presentation earlier, it had a lot of data in there, and just a reminder, all of those slides are available on the links and will be on our website as well. But a question we've had in, what trends are the police seeing, and are there any particular regions where cybercrime is originating from more than others?
Yes, I think this was on the slide, but it was quite a busy slide. So in terms of regions, we know that we've seen social media hacking coming from the West African area, and in terms of ransomware, that's more Eastern European focused. But in terms of trends generally, I think it really comes down to things like artificial intelligence being a threat generally, and how frauds that were carried out by text or written communications could now be audio or video, presented in an audio or video manner, and things like that. So, you know, we identify priorities, strategic priorities at the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau every year. And this year, you know, investment fraud has come up as a hugely increasing area, and mandate fraud, where your firms are being targeted and payments are being diverted through fraudulent emails and account hacking and things like that. That is also a rising area. There are others, perhaps less related to your industry, but just as a snapshot, dating fraud and fraud by abuse of position of trust. We've seen that actually increase, a lot to do with the cost of living crisis, where employees or ex-employees are using data that they have had access to or remain to have access to. And then, of course, we have fraud recovery scams, which now are perpetrated by the same crime groups, where they will defraud an organisation or a member of the public, and then they will call back purporting to being able to recover those funds. And it's actually just a completion of the cycle of the fraud, unfortunately. So those are the sort of the trends and the sort of increasing areas that we're seeing.
Right, thank you, Natasha. And as a reminder, all of that kind of data is available on the links below. Well, Jim, just coming to you for a question that we've had come in. Do you have any tips on how we can ensure CEO, board engage with the need to invest in cyber prevention if they've never had an issue before?
That's a great question by Patricia. So, I mean, everything in cybersecurity, when you're looking at frameworks or whatever you're putting in place, they always start with governance. And as I mentioned in one of my previous answers, it is the board and management that dictate the support, the approach, the engagement with cybersecurity across an organization. So how do you get them engaged? Well, first and foremost, I see a lot of cyberists or technical people talking in their language to senior management, and it's as though they're talking in binary. You've got to talk in a language that the board or the management team understand. It doesn't need to be technical, it needs to be business focused. You don't need to go into the technicalities of cybersecurity. You just need to explain it in a manner that they would understand. So that's the first one, language and tone. Secondly, try to look for examples, be it regulatory or commercial, that the organization either has to comply with or may need to comply with in the future. And I'll give you two examples. Within the MOD, if you're in the supply chain, you have to have Cyber Essentials, and in some cases, Cyber Essentials Plus. Across government organizations, from April last year, are now mandated to follow the GovAssure program, which is based on the NCSC cyber assessment framework. And that's coming down all the way to local government. And that's an annual requirement. So there's specified requirements that they have to meet. And then the last one is a lot of boards or management will say, well, we've never been targeted. We've never suffered a cyber attack. I guarantee that every company is being targeted either individually or randomly every single day. So gather that evidence, be it by your managed service provider or your IT team. Your firewall and your boundary devices will have lots and lots of logs demonstrating attacks on your networks that to date may not have got through, but of course it only takes one successful attack.
Thank you for that, Jim. Patricia, hopefully that's been useful for you to take away and go speak to your CEO or board about and use that. So moving on to the next question. Rowan, do you see a future where there is more mandating by the regulator or government on minimum cyber security levels that business who hold public money must have?
Yeah, I think again it's an evolution thing. Things will keep changing, as Jim mentioned there. GovAssure is the new government standard that is currently being trickled down all the way down to local government. I think potentially there will be new mandatory requirements around maybe meeting GovAssure if you're handling public funds. It's not currently, I don't think it's currently an absolute, but I would highly recommend that those organisations start looking at that sort of thing, purely because at some point they will decide that's probably a good thing to do. So it's worth investigating to see what you're on the hook for, shall we call it. But looking at those future things of where can you meet the GovAssure standard, and if so, how, so that when the time comes, which I'm sure it will, those things you'll be able to pass those things, you'll be able to get past those hurdles, with relative ease because you prepared for it. And as I said before, proper planning in these things definitely helps you and reduces stress level for sure.
Right, thank you very much. Chris, anything from you from kind of the regulator point of view in that question?
No, that was a very comprehensive answer from Rowan there. I'm not sure I have much to add from a regulatory perspective, really. I can't see a future in which handling public money would be set aside as different by the regulator to say, here's a prescriptive set of things that you have to do, especially given what Rowan's just described. So I guess that will be picked up in that environment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. And then putting this question out to the whole panel, welcome any views. Has hybrid working and more people working at home increased vulnerability, and how is best to manage that risk better?
I'll go first, I think then. I don't think, I think it's changed the landscape, definitely. People being at home, they're in their environments. The IT department, shall we say, may feel like they've lost control because we're no longer in the castle and moat structure. We're now spread across different regions, different counties, different cities. I think the focus has shifted from a technical perspective, and that's now driven purely by protecting that endpoint. That device that we've issued to our people is now the focus of how are we going to protect our data and our customer data from being lost, stolen, etc., etc. So I think just the focus has shifted. The vulnerabilities that we had before are still there because we may have a hybrid operation where people are coming to the office still, and they're also doing things at home. I just think we need to bring a more focus on education, on how can things happen? What are the consequences when things happen when we're outside of our office structure, and making sure we're providing trickle education, so constant education, not just once a year, but we're doing it repeatedly to say these are the things to be aware of, not to scare people, not to put fear and uncertainty and doubt into people, but we want them to be educated. We want them to understand what happens, what the potentials are. So I think the key thing really is going to be around education. It's making sure you educate your users in this new world that we now work and live in, and how they best can protect the data.
I think I'd like to also add actually that fraudsters and the like are very good at exploiting loopholes. So if there's a buck to be made by working from home, and then this could potentially feed into fraud by abusive position of trust, for example, I spoke about earlier, that could be something that is good to be alive to. I'd like to think we all work with very trustworthy people and within our organisations, but it's just something to be aware of. Fraudsters are very good at exploiting loopholes and other such areas where they feel that there's an opportunity.
And one very small snippet, because that was a very comprehensive answer from Rowan, is don't forget physical security. Okay, we have a tendency to think about technical security, which is only right and proper, but have a process or a policy that helps your team understand what they need to do physically with those devices.
Great, thank you, Jim. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the session now. But before we finish, I just want to go to each of the panelists to see if there's anything else that they want to mention or a key takeaway for everyone listening to this call. So Natasha, if I could come to you first.
Yes, thank you. I can't reiterate the importance of the cybercrime reporting service that I mentioned in my presentation, and that if anyone is unfortunate enough to be victim of such an attack or other fraud, to report it at the earliest opportunity. It really does help build the intelligence picture from which then we can work out our strategies for fighting fraud and cyber crime in the future.
Right, thank you. Jim, coming to you now.
Yeah, thank you. I think mine is simply referring back to what I talked about in the presentation about business continuity and resilience. Have a tested cybersecurity plan where everyone knows their role and responsibility and are educated in its delivery and execution.
Fantastic. Chris?
So I was going to say plan, but that's already been covered. But it is such an important thing. The other thing I would say, as a regulator, I would say this: know your key stakeholders and how you plan to engage or communicate with them, especially in a situation where some of your systems may have gone down. So don't forget that you've got to communicate with stakeholders, regulators, for example, your insurer, your key stakeholders like your clients and suppliers.
Thank you very much. And finally, coming to you, Rowan.
Yeah, as I said, I think in the talk, being put on the spot, if I were to consider one thing to focus on, I would consider focusing on my users and consider focusing on protecting them. So from a technical perspective, multi-factor authentication is a no-brainer today, because most of the breaches we see are usually through an account that has been compromised on another service or has been compromised through a phishing attempt. And so to protect those accounts, having another factor of authentication, whether that's a one-time passcode or it's a biometric, it's just going to stop a significant amount of brute force attacks that these people will try to engage with on your networks and systems. So if there's one takeaway, protect the user, protect the account. That's probably the first focus I would pick if I had a completely blank slate to start with.
Thank you for that. So that's the end of the session. If I could just thank the panelists, so Natasha, Chris, Jim and Rowan, thank you for coming along and talking to us today and also on the actual compliance conference as well. As a reminder, alongside the recording of this video, there's a big range of different materials available on the subject of cybercrime, including the presentation from the day. We really appreciate your feedback, so if you could click the link and provide any feedback that you have of this session or any of the other sessions of our virtual conference as well. This is the last session of our virtual conference, so thank you very much for attending this session and any other sessions if you have come to them. They are all available on our website, so you'll have access to those. Many thanks for watching, and see you again next year.